Hey guys, it's Blake with Dominion Strength Training. Wanted to make a few videos about leather weightlifting belts and how to tell a quality belt from a low quality belt. And this is essentially what I learned in going through the process of having my own weightlifting belt manufactured. And when I was going through the process of trying to buy a belt, this kind of information that I'm going to give you seemed to be really hard to come by. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is make a video like I would have wanted to see when I was looking to buy a belt. So the first thing about, that's going to be important about these belts is, of course, the leather itself. And what's important to understand is that not all leathers are created equal. And I'll give you my kind of overly simplified explanation of this. If you think about a cowhide, so these are cowhide belts. Cowhide is essentially 3 layers. So the outermost layer is something called the full grain. The full grain is the leather that is going to be the most expensive, the best looking. It's going to go on high-end couches, expensive purses, boots, things like that, where there's really a really high aesthetic quality that's desired. It's also a very tough leather. It doesn't tend to wear out over time. It's very robust, stiff, things like that. Because after all, it is the outermost layer. It's the animal's first defense against its environment. So that's the first layer, is the full grain. The middle layer is something called top grain. And top grain basically has the same mechanical properties, the same tissue structure that the full grain has, but it doesn't have the aesthetic qualities. So it's just as strong, but not as good looking. That would seem like a good choice for these leather weightlifting belts, because we need a very strong material, but like on this one, it's covered inside and out with a layer of suede, so we're not too concerned about the aesthetics of the inner layer itself. The third one down, so we had the full grain, the top grain. The third one down is something called split leather, and this is the layer that's just above the muscle of the animal. And split leather is mechanically very different from the other two. And maybe the best way to demonstrate this is to actually show you some examples. When I went through this process, I had several sample belts sent to me. So I've got a few that I've cut into, and I can show you. This material here that you see, this brown, smooth, very hard material, this is top grain leather. And you'll notice it just kind of looks like normal brown leather, kind of like what you would expect if you were looking at a piece of leather. Whereas the split leather, now the first thing you'll notice about this is the color is very different, but not just the color, the material itself is not hard, stiff, smooth like the other one we were looking at. It's fibrous, and you can see some of the fibers are actually coming off onto this suede here. So I should mention too that another name for split leather is suede. So you probably heard of suede before, but maybe not split leather. So if you hear suede, split leather and suede are the same thing. So what I was noticing when I was looking at different belts is that the better quality belts, the more expensive belts, were made out of this top grain leather, and the lower quality belts were made out of split leather. And what I didn't know was why that was. I gathered that the split leather was cheaper, but was it not as good in some way? And it turns out that it's not. And there are a couple of tests that could be done, and I'm not going to do them, but I can explain what they would be. The first one would be something called a tensile test. So if we were to go to a lab and take some coupon samples, so we've got a sample of the top grain leather, a sample of the split leather, and we put them in an instrument machine. An instrument machine is just a machine that pulls things in tension or compresses them. In this case, we'd be pulling something in tension until it fails. So if we pulled the top grain leather sample to the point of failure, and we did the same thing with the split leather, we'd notice two things. The first thing is the top grain leather would fail at a much, much higher force than the split leather. So that tells the top grain is much, much stronger. The second thing you would notice is that the elasticity of the material, or how much it stretches, is going to be much higher for the suede, the split leather, than the top grain. So the two things that we've learned are that the split leather is stretchier and it's also weaker. So for the purposes of a leather weightlifting belt, it's kind of easy to understand why strength would be important. We want the stronger material. But the stretchiness, what do we make of that? Well, we got to go back and think about what is the purpose of this belt. When you go to do a heavy squat, heavy deadlift, something like that, and you've got your belt on, right before you go to do the lift, you set your back, you take a big breath, and you hold it. And normally when you take a big breath, your abdomen would expand out. Well, now you've got this belt on, so it can't expand out. And all this, what would be expansion, now gets directed inward as increased intra-abdominal pressure. And the net result of that is just it's easier to keep your back set the way you want it. So that's kind of a long-winded explanation of why we want a stiffer material, not just a strong material. I'm looking at my notes here, so I'll make sure I don't forget anything. There's one other test we could do, and that would be a cycle test or a life test. So we could put these belts in some sort of fixture that's going to pull them apart, release, pull apart, release. And it's going to do this some number of times to simulate, a 10-year life or 15-year life of normal use for these belts. And what we would find if we did that with the top grain leather, we do the cycle test, it's going to last 10, 15 years, no problem. Whereas the split leather might last 1 or 2. It's just the properties of the material are not such that it does well with cyclic loading over time. So I think that pretty well establishes that the split leather is really an inferior material as compared to the top grain for the purposes of these belts. So now the question is, well, would it ever be okay to buy a split leather belt? Would you ever do that? Based on what I know now, I would not. You can spend $30 to $40 and get a split leather belt that's going to last you, a year, maybe 2. Or you can spend $60, $70 and get a belt that's going to last, a lifetime. So for me, that seems like a better deal. I definitely would not go with the split leather belt. So that's kind of the long and the short of leather. One other thing that I could show you is how to tell on a belt what type of leather you have. And the easiest way is really just to look at it on the belt wherever you can. So you're not going to cut into the belt. That defeats the purpose. But you can look in around the holes. Hopefully you can see on this one that the leather inside the holes looks the same as the part that was cut away. On my belt here, you can also look around the buckle area. So if you look up under the loop, you can see that you've got the brown leather in here, and also it may be hard to see on camera, but in this buckle area in here, you can look and see the brown leather in there. So that's all top grain leather, and that's what you want. That's what you want to look for. You have to be careful on the split leather belts. So we looked at this one. This was the split leather. But on this belt, they actually went in and they dyed the holes brown. So they're actually trying to trick you into thinking that this is a better quality leather than it actually is. But you can see there's some spots in there. I actually went in with a knife and kind of scratched this away to see what was going on. That's how I found out they dyed it. But you can see that there's spots in there where you can see the white leather. So definitely be careful when you're looking at these belts. You want to make sure you look really close, and don't let somebody fool you into thinking they're selling you a top grain leather belt when it's really not. If you want to check out our belt, it's available at dominionstrengthtraining.com, also on Amazon, and I'll link to both of those in the description of the video. And you know, there's lots of other things about this belt, the hardware and other design features that are important in terms of belt quality, but I think we'll leave it at just discussion on the leather for today, and we'll save those other topics for some later videos. And hopefully this was helpful for you guys, and see you next time.